Andrew
Okay.
Wilson and Dave Smith. Let's do this.
The legendary debate. So the reason I pulled you on to this video that we're recording is because we are going to review the legendary debate between uh, Dave Smith and in only 720p. Disgusting, but yeah. Andrew
Ah,
Wilson versus Dave Smith. Is
yeah,
libertarianism better than Christian populism? This is a legendary debate, and we are going to review it. So,
I've
without
met Dave Smith. I met Dave Smith a couple of weeks ago at YALCon, 2024's YALCon, and
really,
he seems like a really nice guy. Really chill dude. I
he's
haven't.
a
I only
great guy.
watched a small. I'll admit, I only watched a small portion of this debate because the thing about me is I get very. Whenever I watch one of my own lose in a debate, I just cringe and then I just don't want to watch it anymore. So I heard that he wasn't doing very, very good in this debate, and at the beginning he wasn't doing very good. But I am excited to actually watch the whole thing and give my opinion on it, and maybe give some pointers on how he could improve the next time. So yeah, let's do this.
Sounds good, bro. All right, let's get into it.
Debate
20 minutes. You
review.
guys go ahead.
Dave, can you demonstrate for us how you own yourself?
Well, what exactly do you mean by that?
Do you own yourself?
Yes.
Can you demonstrate that?
I mean, I'm demonstrating. We're both demonstrating it right now on this show.
Well, you're not demonstrating that you own yourself.
What do you mean by own?
Well, I think that ownership of a thing is just a social construction. That ownership itself is just a parameter of agreed upon criteria.
Oh, okay, but if you
hang on, let me finish the point.
Sure.
For which, so that's how we know. So I own that guitar because we agree that I own that guitar. That's it. That's the only reason I own it. I don't think that there's anything which is that you can point to that would demonstrate that this exists outside of a social construction we agree to.
Okay.
Real quick, do you agree with this definition?
No, definitely not. And this is why I disagree with it. Ownership is the right to use, or I like to use this definition, the right to exclude another person from a scarce resource, or the right to use it in an exclusionary way, right? Now, his definition is it has to be a socially agreed thing. And the reason why I think this gets into a little bit of dicey territory is, well, does that go for everything? Does that go for your body? Does that go for, your house? So let's say a group of people socially recognize your body as being owned by another person. Would that make it so? That would basically endorse slavery so long as society says that it's okay. That would also endorse things like sexual assault. If a girl doesn't want to allow a person from using the scarce resource that is their body, and society deems that it's okay, well, then there it is. They're okay. He would have no choice. If that's his actual definition, he would have no choice but to say that, yeah, it would be okay. So basically, anytime that society does something that he might deem to be really disgusting, he would have no choice but to say, yes, it's okay, because that it is a societal recognized thing. But libertarians, we don't believe that. It isn't based on society. We based it on consent, essentially. Our property rights system is based on there's two ways to appropriate private property, which is original appropriation, mixing your labor with the land, like yada, 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 homesteading, some people call it. And then there's a transaction, consensual transaction, giving somebody a gift or transacting something that somebody owns. And then that would give you the best link to the scarce resource. And from that would make you the owner. And that basically and because we are inhabiting our body, we are using our body. And it isn't necessarily those things that makes you the owner. It's what makes you the owner is what gives you the best link to that thing. And what we think gives you the best link to those things is those two ways, right? Which is mixing your labor with the land, homesteading, and consensual transaction, right? So because we are using our body, we are inhabiting our body, and we haven't taken our body from another person without their consent. And by for another person to use our body, they would have to necessarily violate our consent. It must be that we are the person, and we can't detach ourselves from our body. Us using our body is we are our body. So it must be that we are the owners of our body. And if we are not the owners of our body, that would mean other people would have the right to use your body without your consent when you have not initiated force against another person. And that is why we believe we are the owners of our bodies. Because it's more of like a way of settling disputes over scarce resources. That's why we have law, right? To settle disputes over scarce resources. So whenever there's a dispute over a scarce resource, because scarce resources can't be used by two people at the same time in exclusionary ways, the property owner would be the person who would have the right to use that thing in an exclusionary way. And how we assign appropriate property rights are based on consent. Now, he assigns property rights based on society. And that's where I completely disagree. And I'm sure he would disagree with it too if pushed on it. Now, continue. Unless
right,
you have
cool.
something
Let's
to
see
say.
how. No, that's all good. Let's see how Dave Smith responds to this.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm missing your point here.
My
So
point
you
is
just
that
kind
I
of-
think it's a social construction when you say that you own yourself. I don't think
Oh,
that
I
you.
didn't say it's not a social construction. But
Well, then you don't own yourself.
that's a false binary. I'm not. Hold on one second. Listen.
No. That's a law of logic. You either do or you don't.
No, I didn't say. No, you're asking me if I do or I don't. Do you own that guitar?
Yeah.
Okay, but you just said it's a social construct.
Yeah, but I gave you the criteria for the social construct
Sure,
would
and
be
I
an
said
agreement of.
and I said I own myself.
Right, but when you
and we
say-
said- so as much as you own
Nope.
that guitar, you've proved
This is
nothing.
incorrect. When I say, do you own
That's
yourself?
fine.
Hold on one
And you
second.
say, I'm not sure.
If you don't mind. So remind me what a social, that means that you make something up in your mind, right?
Yes. So, okay. This is what libertarians need to be careful on, because we need to know the difference between, I guess, like law and like is, because like law is sort of a system that is meant for. Okay, this one might be where we disagree. Law for me is a system of conflict reduction. It's not like the truth. Like, just because the law, even like the ideal NAP law says something is true, I don't believe that it's objectively true that it is wrong to hurt someone, because I don't believe in moral realism. So when we're talking about social constructionism, what Andrew Wilson is saying, and I actually do agree with him on social constructionism, is this idea of ownership is a right that we have agreed upon. Now, whether we agree upon it or not is to be discussed, but it is a right that our legal system recognizes ownership. For example, like if native tribes, thousands of years ago didn't recognize rights, there would be no rights. But because people recognize rights, we therefore implement rights into our legal system.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think you need to necessarily say that the NAP is objectively true in order to prove that it's the most consistent legal system. And the reason why is because when you don't follow the non-aggression principle, you put yourself, and you don't have a respect for property rights. Well, then you put yourself into dicey situations where I would say 99% of people would disagree with it. So even in his situation where he says that, I mean, it's a social construction, as in if we don't believe in rights, like he said, it's not worth anything. Yeah, that is true. So I guess the real debate is, what is the best way to settle disputes over scarce resources? And the NAP, to me, well, not just to me, I believe is the best way to settle disputes over scarce resources, the most consistent way to settle disputes over, the most non-arbitrary way to settle disputes over scarce resources.
Exactly. And I agree with that point right there, because the NAP is practically the best solution to living on planet Earth. Now, I think what Andrew Wilson's point in this debate is, and I don't even think he completely realizes, is he's attacking the idea of moral realism. He's basically telling Dave Smith that Dave Smith has nothing to ground the NAP on because morality doesn't exist. Now, Andrew's answer to this is that he believes morality comes from God. So he's saying that libertarians' justification of the NAP on a moral framework is insufficient. And he's correct in this regard because there is no evidence for moral realism, and many libertarians ground the NAP in moral realism. But if we go the practical route, Andrew Wilson would be wrong. But he's attacking the moral route.
Yeah, no, I like I said, I don't think we need to go into moral realism in order to disprove their moral realist ideology. So, for instance, if he's going to appeal to God, well, then he'll have to prove that God exists.
Yeah, pretty much.
In order for him to be like, okay, well, my objective morality is real because God. Okay, well, does God exist? Okay, well, then this is going to go into a God debate, basically, because if God doesn't exist, well, then it can't be objectively true that his moral rules are real, but if he's not real, you know what I mean? So,
don't worry about that, Sithis. We're definitely not going to get that far. Definitely not going to get that far.
So, yeah, that doesn't make, so to me, even if he were to say that, that wouldn't make, I don't need to make a more realist argument to slap that down. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't make sense on the outset.
Yeah, because you're arguing for a practical justification for NAP, whereas Andrew is, he is attacking the moral realist argument. And Dave Smith doesn't know the difference between the realist argument and the practical argument.
Yeah,
that's nothing against him. That's deep philosophy. That's deep philosophy.
Super deep. That's why I try to stay away from moral realism, because even though I do agree with it in some ways, the thing is I'm not as well versed on it. So I try to stick to arguments that don't necessarily stray that way.
Exactly. You stick to practical legal systems which reduce conflict, and that's what libertarians need to stick to, because that's what's going to it resolves conflict, because that's what's going to convince people that it's good.
Yeah, so I think that's the best way, because it resolves. It makes it's an easier way for people to understand. Continue.
Absolutely.
Sure. Law of logic.
No.
Hang on. Let me finish.
I said yes.
Yeah, the law of excluded middle is going to show this. It can only be yes or no. Do you have self-ownership? Yes or no?
Andrew is right about
because
that.
We agree we do. Do you only own yourself?
Yeah, exactly. And you'll see Andrew's right about a lot of points, but he's just going right over Dave Smith's head. So that's the thing.
That's what happens when you know more than your opponent about their own ideology.
Exactly.
Respectfully,
we agree you do.
Well, I don't agree that that's what ownership means, but you said yes and I said yes, so we're both exactly even.
Then I want to know how you own yourself.
Well, look, if you actually look up ownership in like a dictionary, I think the definition that you gave would be a little bit different than that. So, do I exercise my control over myself? Do I do so morally? Yes, I think so. And I actually think that in order for us to even have this conversation, we both have in a sense agreed to that principle.
I don't think we have.
It's me versus you.
How have we
do you own the arguments that you're making so far in this conversation?
You don't. How do
just
you
want to make one
argument?
small point. He said, "Oh, I'm going to show you the dictionary definition," but most libertarians don't really go by the dictionary definition of ownership. We kind of have our own better definition. I think better definition of ownership.
Speak a completely different language than every other person.
Yeah, so that's why, like, every time I debate with somebody, I have to like explain what I mean by every word. That okay, so an aggression means this, and a scarcity means this, and this means this, because we're kind of using different definitions than everybody else's. I believe they're the correct definition, but nonetheless, they are different definitions than everybody else uses. And so so if he was going to say, oh, well, we should default to the dictionary definition, well, the dictionary definition isn't really going to agree with us, as far as I could tell, on what ownership really is. Generally, what we mean by ownership is the right to control a scarce resource, the right to exclude, to use, it generally falls around the right to use or control or exclude a scarce resource.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, when I say that, I mean, is it yours?
It came out of my mouth, sure.
Are the words you're saying yours?
But how would that make the application that I own that thing?
Well, look, again, define own.
I think that the definition of ownership would be a social construct in which you and I, via agreement criteria, decide that X thing becomes property which is assigned to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So if that's true,
by that definition, do you own yourself?
I would say by the definition of that social construction, I could say that you own yourself, sure.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't mean anything. Let me explain why.
Okay.
Because if the
Wait,
social,
what did we just
because
do this
you know
whole
what?
time?
Let me explain.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to talk too much because I know this is a long debate, but he's asking him for his definition of ownership, but he doesn't have a clear and concise definition of his own ownership for himself. So this is definitely not good on his end because he doesn't have a definition of ownership himself. This is gonna make him this is just not a very good start. Not a very good start.
Yeah, and I do want to provide some context. Dave Smith kind of talked about this a little bit, but he was not really expecting to have like a super gung-ho debate. Like he came into this thinking they were kind of like going to talk about the different ideologies, and Andrew kind of was like, "Oh, surprise, we're sort of having a debate." But yeah, and Dave Smith wasn't entirely prepared for this, so he didn't know exactly what he was walking into.
Yeah.
Because if the social construction, what if we change the social construct and we decide that you can own a person, Dave?
Right. Okay. And what if we change the social construct and says I own your guitar and I own you? What do you?
That's exactly right. What if we
Okay.
change the social construction of ownership to mean you can own a person? Does that mean that people no longer own themselves?
Well, the difference here, right, is that and it's the word
That's
that
the question that I would ask
mentioned
him.
that you didn't.
No, I
that
was just going to say
I
that
would
that's the question
say-
that I would ask him because he's the one that use that definition. Now he's questioning him on his own definition. So he's putting him on the defensive now on a definition that he used.
I've noticed Andrew is really good at debating this specific point. He's really great at making is arguments. So he will say something that is true, but it also has like negative connotations. And then that kind of like startles his opponent because he'll say certain things that are true. Like the idea that, if we all agreed that a certain minority of people are slaves, those people are gonna become slaves. And he doesn't, what's the word I'm looking for? He doesn't provide any like ought context into there. He just states what is, and then that kind of throws people off.
Yeah, if he knew the libertarian definition of ownership, I feel like he would have done a lot better, at least in this section.
That ownership would imply that you're justified in that claim.
How are you justified in that claim?
How am I justified in the claim of owning myself?
Yeah, you just said if
By the way, this is where the debate ends. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
When it gets to justification is one of the most complex philosophical subjects that you can possibly talk about. And I don't blame Dave Smith for not understanding justification, but I think Andrew knows justification better than Dave Smith, and because of this, he kind of just steamrolls him in the rest of the debate.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, I don't think your justification matters. What matters is whether or not you're consistent on your justification, I guess. It has to be. Well, I guess your justification does matter, but if your justification has to be consistent across the board for it to make sense when it comes to law and settling disputes. Because again, when you have two people with two separate law systems, and then have an arbitrary law system, and then two people have a dispute over the arbitrariness of it, well, then there's no way to settle that dispute. So, I just wish he would have just kept it to law.
So something that would be a justification is like, what is the justification for the NAP? The justification for the NAP is conflict reduction. That is the justification.
Yep.
And so, Dave Smith it's like justification
to settle disputes. It's to settle disputes.
And unfortunately, there's no natural. I wish there was something more foundational, but it really just does come down to my preferences, as Mantis Wave would say. We prefer that we don't have conflict, and therefore we all agree on conflict reduction. And the best system for conflict reduction is the NAP. But the point is, the justification is conflict reduction.
Yeah, I would say my justification would be, like you just said, that it is the most consistent way to settle disputes over scarce resources. And
exactly.
Exactly.
You agreed it's a social construction. So if we agree that it's a social construction, then we can own other people. as via social construction. That would be justified.
Well, I don't think so. So the major difference there, right, is that as we're having this conversation, and clearly what's the goal here? To persuade, probably not to persuade each other, but at least to persuade the audience who's listening to us, because we recognize that they are in control. Forget the word own, because that's triggering, evidently, but they are
I'm not triggered by the word own.
Okay. When I say triggering, meaning that's going to start a whole nother debate about semantics. So
yeah, but semantics are important in a debate.
Okay, well, all right. Let's not do this tactic of interrupting every 2 seconds. So let me just finish my point here. So we are both presuming that the people who are listening to this are in control of their own thoughts, and we could potentially persuade them toward our cause. And so if we're doing all of this, we kind of are recognizing in some sense that it's more valuable to persuade people than it is to, I don't know, just enforce our will on that.
Isn't it crazy how Dave Smith has like been talking about argumentation ethics for all this time?
Yeah, he kind of stumbled upon argumentation ethics.
Yeah,
right there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's
I don't know
just
if
his
that's, like,
explanation of it is
intentional.
not very good.
Yeah. Well, I don't
Yeah.
know if it's intentional or if he just like knows it like organically or whatever. But yeah, like it's just I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, he's
so
kind of using an argumentation ethics argument right there, but it seems to me that he doesn't fully understand the argument. So I don't know. And the thing that I noticed about Andrew Wilson that I think Dave Smith, that Andrew is a very good debater. I just realized in this. He's a very, very, and not just, I didn't realize it just in this, but I realized watching this that he's doing a really good job, but I've always known he's a good debater. But what I was going to say is that the reason why I noticed that was that he said, I believe that ownership is a social construction, or socially done. It's based on social, you know what I'm trying to say.
It's socially agreed upon. Yeah,
socially agreed upon. Yes, that's what he's saying. And then Dave Smith is like, he got Dave Smith to agree to that, even though that's not what we consider to be ownership. And based on that, he is questioning him now on his definition of ownership. But the thing was, if Dave didn't use that definition of ownership and he used our definition of ownership, he could have flipped that around on him and asked Andrew, well, actually, we don't believe that's the definition of ownership. And then he could have asked him the same question and had him try to justify, not having slavery or having slavery. But he basically just flipped it on him because he inadvertently agreed to his definition of ownership. And that's where his flaw was.
In that sense, I would say that, yes, there is some kind of norm that there's a justifiable path where you can persuade people versus force them.
Sure. Well, I agree that you can persuade all sorts of people and that can be part of a societal norm and that everybody can agree that that's part of a societal norm. Right. That does not demonstrate that you own yourself. Thus, the key principle for the non-aggression principle, which is self-ownership, that's where the violation comes in. Do people own themselves? Is that a justified position or isn't it?
I'm saying that, yes, I think it is. But again,
then can you demonstrate it?
Well, what would you mean by that? What would it mean to demonstrate that you own yourself?
You would have to prove that you own yourself.
That I can control myself, or what? Again, just be clear about what you're asking.
Well, here, let me give you an example. I'll give you an example to the contrary. I have seen throughout all of human history that human beings seem to be able to own other human beings without much problem. That doesn't seem to be a problem. As long as the social construction of ownership of the time states that you can own another person, you seem to be able to just fine.
Right.
So this axiom of self-ownership is not obvious to me. To be an axiom, it has to be self-apparent and self-obvious.
So what demonstrated that people owned other people throughout time? Prove that to me. The same way you just said to me, prove to me that I own myself.
But I did.
No. Got him.
Hold on.
I'll prove it to you again.
Oof. Okay.
Hold on. Let's try.
Can I say something? Yeah. So he's got him in a trap right here, and because he kind of got him here, so under his definition, he is correct. if ownership is based on society, then he is correct. If somebody societally says that they own you, then that means that they own you. But again, that's not the definition of ownership. If ownership is based on who has the right to, and we can both agree, right? This is where I run into a lot of issues with a lot of people. We can all agree that another person has the ability to take over another person and force them to use their body against their will, right? But that's not ownership. That's possession. Ownership is the right to exclude another person from a scarce resource, and a right is basically a preference. There's no it's basically a preference. It's an action that you commit, and you're saying through this preference, I have the right to do this. So it's an action that ought not be impeded. So that's the real or another definition of a right that I like to use. So when you say I own something, that means I have the right to use this thing. So me using this, nobody ought to have the right to impede me from using this thing. Nobody has the right to stop me from using these things. So you can agree, we can all agree, right, that someone has the ability to take somebody and force them to do things against their will. But what we should talk about, right, what's actually important is whether somebody ought have the right to do that, right? And that's where we disagree, simply because society says, hey, I think that somebody owns you, so therefore they should own you. Well, that doesn't give them the right to do that. We don't believe that gives them the right to do that. So that's when Andrew, again, I'm going to say this again. Once Dave Smith accepted Andrew's definition of ownership, he fell right into his trap. But if he accepted our the libertarian definition of ownership, he wouldn't have fell into this trap. Because simply because somebody has the ability to take your body, or society has the ability to claim your body, or they could claim your body by saying they could claim I claim your body, doesn't mean they have the right. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Try to not. We're only a couple minutes.
You interrupted me. I didn't interrupt you.
Well, hold on. You just asked me to prove that I own myself, and then you asserted that throughout history people owned other people. So prove that.
Yeah, but we already did, and let me explain how. You and I already agreed that ownership is a social construction, and that throughout history, the social construction had changed where people were able to own other people via the social construct. So whatever the social construct is of the day, that's all it is. As long as you agree that ownership is a social construction, you basically have to bite that bullet, right?
Wait, no, I'm not even understanding what you're saying here. So we agreed it was a social construct, and then your next statement after that was, prove to me that you own yourself.
Yeah, a social construction doesn't exist in objective reality.
Right.
It's a term.
Prove to me that anyone ever owned someone else throughout history. And all you said was it was a social construct as well.
You mean like a contract of ownership between slaves or something?
No, it's your question. So you tell me how to answer
my claim is that ownership is a social construction. Do you agree or disagree with that claim?
I think it is a social construct, but there also can be ethical and non-ethical, or moral and immoral.
Well, then if you make the assertion that it's anything more than a social construction, then the burden of claim is on you to demonstrate how it could be.
All right.
Well, okay.
So under I don't mean to stop too much, but under our definition, ownership, owning another person, couldn't really work, because you cannot transfer the title of your body from you to another person. In other words, you can't separate yourself from your body. You can only separate or transfer the title of things that you can separate from yourself. And that is why, another person can't exclusively control your body. They can't while you're inhabiting it. It's impossible. So because of that, no one else can own your body. And, yeah, even if you were to say, hey, you own my body, well, you're still in control of your body. So while you're still in control of it, you're still owning your body. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it's interesting because Andrew is doing like what would you call it? An internal critique on the idea of justification, because he obviously doesn't agree with this. What he's doing is he is testing Dave's limits of moral philosophy. He's trying to get a justification for why people ought to follow the NAP. He's basically saying, is there something that makes the NAP objectively true? And Dave Smith is basically going off the assumption that we want to be a morally virtuous society. But Andrew is asking Dave Smith, why should we be a morally virtuous society? Again, he's basically challenging the idea of moral realism. He's saying, where do you derive your morality? And throughout the rest of the debate, Dave Smith literally just takes for granted that people want to value freedom and life and things that we do all agree on. But again, Andrew's looking for a justification besides my preferences.
Yeah. And it's, unless he has a good understanding of, libertarian ethics, he's not going to answer that in a satisfactory way when it comes to like crossing the is-ought gap and all that.
I mean, again, you're dodging my question here. I asked you the same question you asked me, and you weren't able to answer it either.
I did answer it.
By the way, part of the reason why I asked is because I don't exactly understand the question you're asking me. Are you asking me to say why I think, how I could prove that it is moral that one person should own themselves rather than someone else own them? Is that
that's
the question?
that's not the question. So here's the question. Let me explain it to you.
Okay.
The non-aggression principle itself revolves around the idea that human beings own themselves, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the thing is that you and I can agree that there's been tons and tons of slavery throughout human history, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So those people clearly own these other people. So this has to be a social construction of agreement is what is ownership. We agree that you own it, therefore you own it. What I'm asking for is some type of justified evidence that is not the case and that there is some moral ought or some type of demonstration, philosophically or otherwise, that a human being actually owns themselves.
Okay, so just to be clear here, if I were to say, if you're saying ownership meaning just strictly control over who has something, then yes, there have been lots of times where people can come just take all your stuff and then claim they own it. And if you're saying the law recognizes it or the society recognizes it, then essentially they own it. So
they can do that with people too, right?
Right. And in a sense, I agree with you. And that
so then you don't own yourself.
Okay. Let me just finish what I'm saying.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. I mean, dude, we got a long show here, so let's just let each other talk. So in a sense, I agree with you. Yes, you can take possession of something. I don't think anybody is arguing that, and I don't think it's a very impressive point to make that, yes, people can take possession of something, and that could be codified by law or society. What we're talking about is something slightly different, which is justified ownership over something. So
right.
Then the claim is like whether it's morally right that you own this or not. Fair enough. And I'm sure there's lots.
I'm just
of
looking
areas,
for the demonstration of what is morally right. Sure.
Sure. Well, okay. If you're looking for the demonstration of what is morally right, I'm sure.
I want to say Dave Smith gets it. He does get it now. He got it. Moral justification. That's what Andrew was looking for.
See, the thing is, I wouldn't go super hard. And see, the thing is, that's why I stray away from the whole
morality,
moral realism stuff. And I just try to put him in the situation. What I would have done is I would have not accepted his definition of ownership and then use his definition of ownership back at him in the way that he's doing to Dave. Like, I would have been like, okay, well, your definition of ownership is different from mine. This is what I believe. So if you believe that it's a social thing, well, then if I own a slave, does that give me the right to, do things to her that you think are unpleasant? And if he says yes to that, well, sheesh.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of big. Dave has put himself in a bad situation because he doesn't understand the libertarian ethic as much. So he doesn't even realize that he has an ace in the hole right there, right? That he could use against him, but because he doesn't know the definition of our definition of ownership, he's not going to really catch on to it. So, yeah, his ace in the hole against Andrew would be, okay, well, if somebody owns somebody, just ask him back that same question. Well, and if he says no, well, it's just like, well, under my definition of ownership, that is consistent. for there not to be slavery. But under yours, slavery is perfectly okay. So slavery is okay sometimes, and then he would have no choice but to justify slavery under his own ethic. So yeah, that's what he should have done.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Or there's lots of areas where you would believe something is morally right and something else is wrong, and the demonstration of it would be what? That this is what you believe, this is what seems to be right and wrong, this is what has been accepted. And
no, my justification would be divine command, not seemings or phenomenal conservatism.
Okay,
which is what seemings
sure.
are.
So okay, but so divine command. So what?
Which, by the way, just so everybody knows, is a logical fallacy. Divine command is a logical fallacy. But yeah.
And how would you exactly?
Yeah.
Sorry, Christians out there. Don't mean to be disrespectful.
Yeah. So whether you believe in God or not, it's like you need justification, and I don't know. That's a whole another topic. But like the quick summary version is that divine command is a logical fallacy because it just puts the burden onto something else that requires justification, basically.
Yep.
Determine what is and isn't divine command.
Well, let's assume for a second that I was, I don't know, like delirious, right? And just thought I talked to God and he gave me commands, right? If it's just preference, if we're just going off of preference, just things which Dave prefers are true, and Dave just prefers that you own yourself because he does, then any preference that I came up with in this delirious state where God was speaking directly to me would be just as valid as whatever preference that you just axiomatically come to because you just want them to be true. My claim here is that libertarianism at its foundation, at its fundamental foundation, is flawed because this axiom of self-ownership isn't actually true, but rather a social construction which is asserted as though it is a truism when it clearly is not. So it's a fundamental flaw. The reason that you guys come up with such absurd conclusions like that prostitution ought to be legal and all these other things is, and by the way, Dave, you have to end up with that. Otherwise, people don't own themselves. Do you think the state should come in and stop your brother from unaliving himself, for instance? Do you think that they should do that?
Well, hold on. All right. Stick with your point that you were making at first, because you're just jumping all around here.
Well, no,
what was the first thing you were saying.
Well, I already gave you the point. I'm saying
I think that's a perfectly reasonable question. On respectfully to Dave Smith, I think that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. And the answer would be no. You would not have the right. I mean, assuming that the person is perfectly capable of making their own decision. You would not have the right to stop them from prostituting themselves. You would not have the right to stop them from unaliving themselves. At the end of the day, you are the owner of your body. And that means that you have the right to do with it what you want. So no, nobody has the right to stop you from doing anything that you want, so long as you aren't initiating an aggression against another person.